welcome to this interview in the series that is all about empowering a league of extraordinary mothers on how to get more energy, a body we love, and that zest for life that we crave. I missed out the bit about using the power of food. So today's interview is with the gorgeous Mary Kelly. Mary is a mum of 3 who has found a way to heal her family from a huge number of food allergies and other health challenges, replacing pills with real food and chemicals in her home with beautiful homemade non-toxic medicinal balms. So we are going to learn so much today, and I'm so grateful to you for being here, Mary. Thank you.
My pleasure.
So I do start each interview with, tell us your story and how you came to be here. And I know that this is going to take up the whole 45 minutes because the story is just phenomenal. But let's just start with a bit of your background and why you came onto the journey that you're now on.
Okay. We were living in London. I was 30 years old and I'd just given birth to my firstborn son. And that was the first time I ever really came into any kind of awareness of food being a problem for my body or for anyone else's body. I knew people who had allergies, but I'd always prided myself on being a very healthy person. And I now realize that I probably was living in a bit of a denial. And I think that many of us are, because what happened over the next few years revealed to me that the state of my gut was anything but good. It was, in fact, it was dreadful. And it really struck me, and it still strikes me to this day, how long I endured the symptoms that I did with a positive attitude and believing that was normal, when in fact it was common. But I think we all suffer from believing that common is normal, and it certainly isn't. So what happened was we gave birth to this beautiful little boy, huge baby. That's a whole nother story. That would take a whole nother 45 minutes. Anyway, in England, and we were living there with no family support. We had a few friends, but it was just really my husband and I. And he was a good baba. He was so beautiful until he was 3 weeks old. And when he was 3 weeks old, he started to vomit. And it was extraordinary amounts of vomiting. It was after every breastfeed. It would come out of his nose. I ended up almost every day sitting on the floor of the shower covered in vomit with my baby, crying my eyes out because the doctors, the NHS, God bless it, really doesn't pay attention to you unless you're a very squeaky wheel. So I would go down to the doctors, and I was still in that kind of nature of, oh, everything's okay, it's just that he's vomiting a bit. And all babies vomit. You're a first time mum. Yeah. And so it kind of steadied out. He would vomit 4 times a day, and because I was a first time mum, I honestly I knew something was wrong. I just couldn't find anyone who could help me, so I just kind of carried on. I didn't know anything about whether it was my breast milk affecting him. This carried on until we started him on solids. And he was fine always on the first meal that I would give him. And so I would make a huge batch of it. And the second time I gave it to him, the vomiting. So at this stage, we had a baby who was born in the 99th percentile who couldn't tolerate anything. He would hold down every second or third breastfeed. And rice cereal he could hold down a little bit. But anytime I added any vegetable or fruit or meat or anything like that, he would almost always vomit. It was confusing because it wasn't every time. It would, and I was just an absolute ball of postnatal depression and PTSD. I had what they get in the war, just complete trauma associated with food and trying to feed my child. And I still couldn't get a doctor to listen to me. This carried on until he was about a year old. And then finally the doctors pushed us through to a pediatrician, and we started testing, and it just went horribly. It was a really unsupported system. And I think now, it was 10 years ago now, and I just think either they didn't know what they were doing, or they'd never met a child like Daniel. And And I really got the sense that they didn't believe me, that it was that bad. They thought, no, maybe he's allergic to dairy, but he can't possibly be allergic to all these things, you know. And the sad thing is, in 10 short years, we now know that there are thousands of children like this.
Yeah.
Well, when 10 years ago, Daniel was the first one they'd ever seen.
Yeah. It's just becoming more and more and more common, more and more prevalent.
That's it. And the worst part is we're like those frogs sitting in the water as you warm the water up, is we're starting to use words like it's normal for your child to be allergic like this, which is a whole nother lecture. But so what ended up happening was we actually decided we were going to leave England, and we went traveling for a few months on our way back to Australia. And the reason we were going to leave is we just didn't know what to do with the sick child, and we felt we would get more support back in Australia. My husband's Australian, and my parents were now living in Brisbane. So we set off, and by the time we got back to Australia, he was now failure to thrive, and he was big head, thin little body, swollen belly, those swollen rings under his eyes. We used to call him Casper the Friendly Ghost because he was so pale. Still didn't realize the extent of it until I saw him years later when he was well. I didn't realize how unwell he looked. Still surviving on soy milk and rice. I think there was something else. But sugar. Appalling. And when we got back to Australia, he started to have some quite severe allergic reactions, where my mother had butter on her hands and she gave him a hug and he broke out an urticarial rash, so a raised bumpy rash all over his body, all down his back. And at this point, the Australian medical people seemed to have a lot more experience with allergies. And so they just pushed him right to the front of the list to go and see a specialist, an allergist. And we went into this, and I just felt finally like someone was listening and helping us. And, so because I was still I was actually not pregnant with my second child, because we do this to ourselves, don't we? I had, and I still had perinatal depression now. So also hadn't quite learned how to cope with the post-traumatic stress disorder, because I was still in the trauma. Still having to deal daily with ideas of your child dying because somebody kissed him and they'd eaten nuts. We were getting to this anaphylactic stage now where, anyway, I'll just go through what we did medically then, and then how bad it got even under a medical help. It got really good because the things that stabilized were his weight. They put him on a hypoallergenic formula called Elicare. And I know a lot of mums listening to this interview were like, Elicare. Because it's becoming so much more common, and told him to keep eating rice just to stay in the game, but that he mustn't eat food, that he was nil by mouth, other than, so it started off just the Elicare, and then after about 6 months it was, let's give him some rice just so that his muscles in his mouth can keep developing. So he was on Elicare formula from 18 months until 5 years old. Oh, wow. And during that time, we had rice, and then we managed to get a bit of corn into his rice, and we found a sausage, but he lost that fairly quickly. He would really go up and down. Unfortunately, I realized way too late down the path that he didn't cope well with the vaccinations. Every time he was vaccinated, his health would dip. And it was just one of those things that I was really adamant I wanted him fully vaccinated, and the campaign to vaccinate all children was working really hard on my heart, wanting to do the right thing for my son. And it was too late that I realized that he was one of those kids that genetically just couldn't cope with the toxic load from it. And so that was a whole nother education that I had. But at the time, we just were trying to do what everyone told us to do, because we didn't know any better. The irony is, when Daniel was about 2.5 years old, somebody gave me a book called Gut and Psychology Syndrome.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And I read the book and I knew it was true. I knew it was true, and I didn't have the capacity. Now I had 2 little children. I was just so exhausted and depressed and traumatized that I could see that this was something I should do. But I just went, no, I've picked this path with the doctor, and I'm just going to carry on, because then somebody else is doing the thinking for me.
Yeah.
And I don't have to deal with all of that. And that was fine. He gained weight, but he lost a lot. He would gain food and then lose it, and gain food and then lose it. So it definitely was this weird up and down pattern with him. And then at 4 years old, so was that 2013 possibly, we had the worst year of our lives with him, where he received his 4-year-old vaccinations, and we just saw a very rapid deterioration from that point on. It was just like it had tipped him over into, he was bad already, and it had tipped him over into a toxic load that he couldn't cope with. So now we ended up in hospital with all sorts of strange diseases. He had the mumps that he'd been vaccinated for. He got gastritis that was so violent that he ended up in hospital because they couldn't rehydrate him because he was allergic to the rehydration fluid.
Oh, Mary.
Yes. And so at that point, and he'd had 2 broken arms as well. He was so light, his bones were so brittle. And the strange thing was to look at him, he looked fine. He was growing, he was putting on weight. It was just the internal stuff. It was just so dreadful. Like, he never had eczema. That is such a common symptom for kids like Daniel. They get awful bleeding eczema. Danny never had any eczema. So he looked like a little porcelain doll on the outside, and inside was just dreadful, dreadful. When we were in hospital and he had gastritis, that was when I fell to my knees, and that was when I really, I come from a Christian faith, and I really stepped back into that faith, and in a desperate, desperate state, I prayed and I prayed, and I said, God, just tell me what to do, and I'll do it, because this isn't working. This isn't working. And I finally felt a bit of a strength welling up inside me, and a solidity to be able to take control of my mothering, to take it away from the doctors who were doing their best, but were harming, not helping. They were putting band-aids on the problem. If food is the problem, take food out of the equation. But a child can't survive without good food, and there were lots of band-aids. He was on 7 different medications a day at that point. Steroids, all sorts of things. Asthma had now crept into our equation as well. So I remember just falling to my knees, praying to God, and I just had that vision of that book that I had read 2.5 years earlier. It just came into my head, and I looked at my husband. Tears were pouring down both of our faces, and I said, we've got to do it. We've got to do the GAPS diet. And from that point on, my husband and I, we went home. We took the son home. They eventually managed to rehydrate him with just water. So he was so thin and brittle, and we took him home and we started to research. Between the 2 of us, we read every white paper under the sun to try and corroborate what this woman was saying in this book. And there was so much good stuff out there. There was so much. And one of the most amazing things that happened was that we found a group on Facebook of mums who had kids like Daniel. And I was like, I didn't know there was anyone else out there. And these mums had healed their children. And I remember going on there with my son. I said, I know you've all healed your children, but my son is different. He's much worse than yours. There's no way, right? And looking for a spark of hope. And mothers came back with these stories, these incredible stories of heal the gut, heal the child. And there were hundreds, thousands of these women in this kind of secret group, because they had all basically disconnected from the medical matrix of symptom management. And they had kind of empowered themselves as mothers to heal their family. And now I understand that's how it should be. Mothers are the doctors. Mothers keep the chronic health well. And in the emergencies, the doctors keep us alive and keep us well. There's a role for all of us. You know what I mean? And
it's not mothers alone, is it? It's mothers coming together. We've got to share this information.
The sharing of the knowledge. So then I started on all these different tangents and rabbit holes, a few little rabbit holes, but of how society, and I don't know who drives it, but I suppose people in power drive. For the last 30 or 40 years, there has been a massive kind of a campaign to get mothers to doubt their instincts. And to get mothers to stop talking to each other. Because the minute you start talking to each other, you stop using medicine. So there's this idea of this, there was a brilliant TED talk on the knowledge of the masses. And it's so clever because it says, if somebody gives you a tip, like try celery juice for a week, and you try it and it makes you feel much better, you will share that with everyone. If you try celery juice for a week and you notice nothing and it makes you feel nothing, that information stops with you. You're never going to share it because you're going to look like an idiot sharing something that doesn't work. So that's how women have shared knowledge for 10,000 years. And the reason that these herbal remedies and these old wives' tales and all the negative words that we apply, anecdotal evidence, all of these things work so beautifully is because of that knowledge of the masses, and people don't share things that don't work. You know? I'll just carry on with our story. So we got ourselves into a position where we had enough research and we backed ourselves and we were like, this is going to work. Now what do we do? Because my child is allergic to everything that is in the GAPS protocol. So how do we do that? So I went back to these mothers, and they had kids where had been on Elicare or on Neocate, and they said this. They literally said the most gentle broth is lamb broth, and broth is a huge foundational food in the GAPS broth. They said the most gentle broth. It seems to be that these children, and so we now had a title of FPIES, which is food protein intolerance, which is basically intolerance to everything because everything has some form of protein in it. These kids seem to tolerate in very tiny doses lamb broth. So I would make lamb broth and I would put drops of it into his formula and build it up. And he didn't react to it as long as it was in tiny, tiny drops. And suddenly we started to notice things. We started to notice that before we couldn't go out to cafes because if eggs have been cooked and egg is in the air, we'd end up in hospital. So now we were noticing that there was no reaction, there was no welts coming up when we were around cafes. So we started trying a few little foods with him, and we managed to get the broth up to half a bottle of broth and half formula, which was just incredible. And when we managed to do that, we also got to a position where we got about 3 or 4 safe foods for him, and they were zucchini, butternut, carrot, and lamb. Those were the 4 foods.
He was 5, 6.
He was 5. Yeah, he turned 5. So he was in hospital just before his 5th birthday. Right. And then between August and November, we started researching and started trying the broth in his formula. With the start date, we decided we were going to start the GAPS introduction diet on the 2nd of November, 2013. And we did. And originally it was going to just be me and my son, but my daughter, who was 3 at the time, would not be left out of this new interesting way of eating. So she joined in too. Yeah, and before we started, I had so much fear. I was breathing into paper bags on a regular basis. I just had so much fear about feeding my child. And so it was a real act of faith. And I had dreams about it. I dreamt that God said, if you do this, the blessings will come pouring in the windows and the doors. So just do it. Take an act of faith. And that's actually what happened. We started. And within 6 weeks, he was eating everything.
That's amazing. That is absolutely amazing. Considering that level, that, quantity of time and that level of illness to have change just from something as simple as broth.
Yeah, as broth and food cooked in broth. So the veggies were cooked in broth. And so that Christmas, so November 2nd was when we started. Yeah. That Christmas was the first time my son was able to eat a Christmas lunch.
Wow.
And he sat at the table and he ate apple crumble and ice cream, all homemade by me and all GAPS legit.
Yeah.
And ate the roast for dinner and veggies. And he ate the whole meal with his eyes closed. Like this. Oh, Mom, so good. It was too good. But one of the most astounding things, other than the fact that he had gathered all these foods, was the color that just went glug, glug, glug. It flooded back into his face. He just grew out. His bones got more dense. He'd broken 2 bones the year before. He's never broken another bone since. He became much more solid to hold. The rings under the eyes disappeared. The tummy was flat. The skin was more pliant. And just, he had this color in his face that made you, sadly, reminded me of like a 1930s baby calendar. You know, where they've got the little pink cheeks.
Rosy cheeks.
And it was so sad because it occurred to me, you don't often see kids with that color in their faces anymore. That beautiful peachy skin. And my little girl as well, we took her along for the ride. I'd never really thought too much about her and what was going on with her. But so amazingly, some of the things we discovered when we healed was that my daughter had been definitely ADHD spectrum. She was an intelligent little girl, but she couldn't concentrate on an instruction. She had, like, her eyes would just dart from side to side, and you'd hold her face and try and just say to her, can you pick the hat up? And she would panic because she couldn't process. And she healed very, very quickly from all that behavioral stuff. I think the toxins just cleared out from the brain. My son started to say things like, oh, he'd never been a touchy child. He didn't like to be touched. And he started to say things like, it doesn't hurt to be hugged anymore. I think it had physically hurt him. The bacteria in their mouth changed. So the food that they used to just hate, they were now eating. My daughter was going to bed and she was talking in her sleep about fatty lamb chops. Oh, mommy, fatty lamb chops. she really loved, and to this day, my son doesn't love meat. He loves vegetables. And there's such an interesting explanation, apparently, for that Dr. Campbell McBride, who wrote the GAPS book. She said, usually children who crave the vegetables have a high toxicity.
Right.
And veggies are so good for clearing out toxicity in the body. And the children who crave the meat and the fats and the animal products tend to be children who are more reactive to food. And my daughter definitely reacts to wheat and dairy.
It's particularly those lovely sulfur-rich veggies that do all that detoxifying.
They do such an important job for us. And the reason we went down the GAPS route was because I really believed that the animal products have enzymes in them which help your gut to recover twice as fast. So the veggies really help to cleanse the body, but you still need something that's going to solidify a damaged gut. So it's kind of a three-pronged approach. It's using food to detox your body, using animal products to heal the gut lining, and then bringing in the fermented foods and the probiotics to help rebalance the gut so that it doesn't regress back to where it was.
Mary, I can't even begin to imagine. I mean, all this story is all very focused on your children, and we as mothers tend to do that. But I can't even imagine the state that you were in carrying your children through this process. So, you went on the GAPS as well. We know now that each of us, as we're having children, we're actually carrying, for the next 2 generations down, there's 3 generations worth of health in us when we have our children. So obviously what was going on in your health when you had your precious son is part of the picture. And I know that you've talked about this in various blog posts and things that I've looked at. So for mums to get a picture for themselves on the importance of, we may have had our children, but the importance for our children to have their healthy gut in place before they have the next generation, before our grandchildren arrive. This is a big part of the picture, isn't it?
It is such an important conversation to have. And I have this picture in my mind of a day when that will be part of school education is gut health and for girls. Girls to get themselves ready for pregnancy, especially in a day of so much toxicity and antibiotics and chemicals on our clothes and on our plates and everything. So one of the things that we realized, I thought that I had postnatal depression because I was in a really tough situation. But the reality is I had postnatal depression because my body was so depleted. There's a term, postnatal depletion. That's pretty much what I had. And I have been on a hell of a journey now, because when I went on the GAPS diet, the die-off, which is the reference to when the bad pathogenic bacteria and parasites and fungus die in your body, the die-off was so extreme because they release their toxins when they die, that it was quite a shock how unwell I was. And now it's been very easy for me to trace it all the way back to when I was a kid. I avoided dairy like the plague. And I had always a runny, snotty nose. I was that kid who, was sniffing their nose. And my mum was told to take dairy out of my diet. And even in those days, she couldn't even fathom that, someone couldn't tolerate food. So she took milk out, but she didn't take cheese or cream or anything like that out, And she's like, well, I took the milk out. And I didn't approve. So she went to the doctor and said, no, it's not the dairy. Anyway, so for the rest of my life, I always avoided specifically milk and cream, but I would eat cheese and things.
Yeah.
And then when I was about 28, I really just started to feel a bit rubbish and started trying to cut it out, just intuitively. And I always felt better when I did. But one of the things that happened was when I was at university, I got quite a severe dose of glandular fever, right at a time where I was playing a lot of sport. So this is that Epstein-Barr virus that I think haunts many of us for years to come. I did it while I was doing very, very competitive rowing, and I was training 4 or 5 hours a day when I was rowing, and I was misdiagnosed. I wasn't diagnosed with glandular fever. I was diagnosed as I had tonsillitis, because you get white spots on your tonsils when you get glandular fever. Yep. And so I was put on antibiotics, and I was put on antibiotic after antibiotic after antibiotic until eventually 6 months later, they did a blood test and went, oh, it's EPV, it's not tonsillitis. So by now, a huge amount of damage had been done to a gut that was already, probably my body was genetically already imbalanced. I think, I had the MTHFR gene. You load all of that up with poor diet, a lot of drinking at university, glandular fever, way too much sport, which can do so much damage to your lymphatic system and when you have glandular fever, and then 6 months of antibiotics. So from that point in my life, my health took a serious turn. I started to get hypoglycemic seizures, literally in the rowing boat. I would still be rowing, but I would have left the building. I would get to the shore and they were having to put Coke down my throat to try and get me to come back. It was horrible stuff. And no one really to support or understand that you're at university, you're kind of on your own, there's and then, I went off when I met my husband. I started eating a lot better. My diet got a lot better, so a lot of those symptoms subsided until we had children. And then when Danny came along, the mental health went a bit crazy.
Yep.
And then when we went on GAPS, which was 5 years after that, my mental health came right so well. It just, I went from always feeling like I was up, down, and I just thought that was my personality, to feeling much more steady. And it was such a revelation to me on what journey I'd been on for the last 20 years that I hadn't even acknowledged or recognized that maybe this isn't normal, that maybe this is too difficult. And so that went, I healed well after GAPS. And then I had a miscarriage when we were trying for our third. I had a miscarriage followed by quite an intense weight gain, which was strange because I was fasting at that time. And then I went on for the next year to have multiple miscarriages. And you wouldn't even refer to them as miscarriages. They were chemical pregnancies. I would test positive, and then 2 days later, I would lose the pregnancy. And this just went on and on and on and on. But by this stage, I was a lot more empowered. I knew a lot more about the gut and how things interact. And I really got a strong sense that it was parasites that were the problem. So I went to the doctor and I said, will you test me for parasites? And he said, why would I do that? I said, I think they're interfering with my hormones, because my iron levels were high, and there were just a bunch of things in my blood test that I was now able to look at my blood test and figure things out, and he said, I think that you're on a wild goose chase, but we'll test anyway. And when he came back with the tests were ridiculous amounts of parasites, he called me and he was like, it's parasites. How did you know? How did you know? I was like, I'll sit down and I'll tell you. Anyway, one of the reasons I knew is because parasites have a massive interaction with iron. They either eat all the iron, or they're a parasite that stores all the iron, but it tests as high ferritin in your blood level when there's that much. So parasites often point to heavy metals. Problem in your body. Anyway, I did a little parasite treatment for myself, and guess who fell pregnant the very next month with Asha, my third child, and I carried her all the way through, and I was really pleased that I'd managed to figure this out. The journey continues. It's never with an adult. It's never straightforward. Like with my kids, they were sick. I healed them. They're fine now. With me, it is. I heal a little bit. I get worse. I get pregnant. It wrecks my body. So with Asha, I had a terrible pregnancy. It was, I imagine it was because I'd just done parasite treatments, and you get quite depleted, and then I fell pregnant with her. So I had hyperemesis gravidarum, which is severe morning sickness where you can't keep down food at all. I had that for 9 months, all the way.
Ooh.
I couldn't swallow my own saliva.
Ah.
How bad it was. So I was on Danzatron medication to try and keep food down. I was basically at this point doing everything I could to keep the baby alive and myself okay.
Yeah.
And I lived on eggs for some weird reason. That was the only food I could tolerate, was eggs. So I just, thank goodness, because they're such a nice. Eggs and also dry things, like, so I got back onto sourdoughs. And so I think by the end of my pregnancy, my liver wasn't well. My gut health would have gotten wrecked again. They say that for every month you have hyperemesis, it takes 4 months to recover postpartum. So then I give birth. It's a third child, so it's a whole nother level of chaos. And this was the first child of ours who didn't sleep very well when she was teething. Our other two were brilliant sleepers. And so we were like, let's have a third baby because we have such angels and it's lovely. And then this one comes along, not so much an angel. Mm-hmm. Lovely, delightful. Yeah. Not so much an angel, you know. So here I am, 38 years old now. And then I got 18 months of no sleep. And we thought, oh, she's never going to sleep. But then her last tooth popped out, and the next night she started sleeping 12 hours through night. So she was just highly sensitive in the mouth area. But she was exhausting. And so then I couldn't recover well. I didn't recover well from the pregnancy. And I was just kind of white-knuckling it through everything, you know, and feeling quite sorry for myself because this has been a journey for me.
Yeah.
But I stopped breastfeeding when she was 18 months old and started to feel a little bit better.
Yeah.
And then I finally had another prayer moment where I just felt, I can't figure this out. My brain's too foggy. I just couldn't. I was scared of going back on intro. I was scared of cutting more food out of my diet. I just was in such a state. Yeah. And then I finally just felt led. I just felt that dairy had become a problem again for me. Okay. You know, because I'd managed to get myself back onto dairy. Yeah. And I was okay, but I think all of this wrecking gut stuff meant that I was still having dairy. And so to break it down, I worked it out. I finally got enough clarity and I worked it out. My body was in a really heightened state of inflammation. So these are the things that I figured out. Was I was obviously eating something in my diet that was causing massive inflammation. And there was stress. I had so much stress in my life. I had 3 children. We'd moved to a farm. So we had farm animals to look after. I was running my business. I wasn't getting enough sleep. And my body was in a state of chronic inflammation. You put all that together and you're going to fall off a cliff at some point.
Yeah.
So I thought, okay, well, let me go and spend the money and get all the tests done. And I got all the tests done and it came back with chronic inflammation and stress. And parasites were back. And there were just a whole bunch of things that I looked at and I got a bit shocked. And then I went, wait a minute. My pancreas isn't behaving well. My hormones are all over the place. I have raised aldosterone, which causes weight gain and water retention, I've always been an exercising person. I've always had a strong body, not necessarily a thin body, but I've always been fit and healthy. Now I would exercise and I would gain 5 kilograms over the course of a month. So I had to stop exercising because every time I exercised, I would blow up a bit more. The aldosterone gave me the answer to why that was happening, because that's a edema-causing hormone if it's in excess. Yeah. So here I had this answer. And so I went, okay, I know what to do. I sat down and I wrote myself a plan. I said, I need to get the inflammation under control. And I don't want to use the drugs that they give you for, so I'm going to use celery juice. Celery juice, we go back to it works. Celery, it aggravates aldosterone. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to treat the parasites. I'm going to go for it because that worked for me last time. I removed dairy from my diet. I removed any traces of wheat. So I'd had sourdough every now and then. I said, no more wheat. And then I looked at what other foods are inflammatory to my particular body. And I knew chocolate was, coffee, which I took out of my diet, and nuts. All the things I love, all the delicious things, everything good, out, gone. But let me tell you, I went back to the doctor 6 weeks later because she wanted to refer me to a thyroid doctor. The word escapes me. Enterologist?
Yep.
Yeah.
No.
Endocrinologist.
Yeah. No, that doesn't sound right.
It doesn't. Thyroid doctor.
Yeah.
And so she had explained to me that in order to get your aldosterone to turn around, it would take a good solid 2 to 3 years of this awful medication, like a diuretic that causes, side effects, cancer, all sorts of different things. I'm like, I'll try celery juice things. So, so I went back to her, and she was sitting in her room, and she was like, this was the look on her face. And I was like, oh, this is bad. And she says, your aldosterone is normal. Yeah. And she said, I don't understand. And I was like, I understand. Let me tell you. So, and so the great thing about, she's a brilliant doctor, and she kind of won't see you unless you're doing Whole Foods.
Oh, wow.
My kind of doctor.
Yeah.
So she wrote down everything. I said, this is what I've been doing. And I did it without medication, and I turned it around. So now I'm feeling a lot better. I can feel the inflammation is coming down. It is slow, but it is, the brain fog is gone. The kind of disconnectedness from your world is gone. I'm starting to reconnect with everything. I'm feeling like I can cope. I'm feeling like I've had to put in not just the food strategies. I don't believe it ever is just a food strategy. I think you have to look holistically. You have to look at your spirit. You have to look at your relationships, at your stress levels, because physical stress, I never knew this. Physical stress is exactly the same as, there's 2 types of stress. You can be eating something that causes so much stress on your body that it causes a deterioration in your gut health.
Yep.
And mental stress does the same thing.
There's actually 3. It's physical, emotional, and chemical.
That's it. Yes. Yeah. And I hadn't really fully considered that. I got into my tunnel vision of food will fix everything. Yeah. So it was quite good for me to get into the, how do I reduce my stress? And I started saying no to things. And I started actually working on having healthy boundaries with people, and not just people in my physical world, but online as well. I was overwhelmed with how many people always were asking me questions and asking for information and advice, and all these people had big needs, but I was putting them before my family and myself. So I had to really set some healthy boundaries. I had to even set healthy boundaries with the animals. It's true. My dog didn't like being locked up, so I wouldn't lock her up. But then she'd run crazy and chase cars and chase chickens. But I was like, I realized I had to set a healthy boundary. I had to stop being so empathetic to my animal, because it was causing stress in my life. I mean,
this picture of stress. It's funny, as I do these summits, each one sets a theme, and the first one was very much anxiety is a very strong theme. In this one, it's overloaded mothers, it's stress, and it doesn't matter how much we get our diet right and meditate and whatever spiritual practice it might be. If we are stressed, if we don't take time for ourselves, if we consider time a luxury rather than a need,
or if there's guilt associated.
That's a big one. And I'm very guilty. I still, I was having a conversation with a girlfriend just on the weekend. I lay down on my bed and I was like, right, I need 10 minutes. I've just come back from a whirlwind trip to the US for work and putting this series together, and I've got 4 children, and and I was like, right, I've got jet lag. I'm getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, wide awake. And I was like, 10 minutes. I could not lie there for 10 minutes. I was like, no, look, my alarm's not working. I've got to get up. I could not stop for 10 minutes.
No.
And I don't think I'm alone. I think there's a lot of us that are just so wired to go. And if you stop, it's like, but I don't have time.
You know what? I think my story is exactly that, because I healed myself and I was well. And then we decided to have a 3rd baby. And I don't regret that, but there was stress. Then we decided to buy a farm and move into that farm just after Christmas. And then my business took off, and I didn't pull it in. I just let it take over. And then our kids were starting in a new school. We were in a community. We didn't know anyone. I didn't have anyone to help, and I kept adding it. And then we got more animals, and then we did a renovation and all of these things because
you can.
Because I didn't think it through, okay? But because that's where I see other people doing. And I think there's a real habit in our society that is bringing the women down, which is we look to other women on how to behave, or we look on how to respond to our children. And you see it a lot with the fear parenting, like, and I feel like I've kind of peeled back one at a time. Who am I? What is my identity? How do I want to parent my children? And I love and appreciate all the mothers and what they're doing and how they're parenting. But I always look at, but they're able to take their kids to all these different sports. Therefore, I should do that because otherwise my kids are going to miss out somehow. And I really go back to that kind of raping of the woman's ability to trust her own instincts and her own mothering and her own decisions.
Yep.
We've been told that's no good, and then we've also had it physically taken from us in some respects. There's medical stuff that's happening where women are encouraged not to make choices for their family, but to make choices for society. And I think if your choice is to make a choice for society, that's your choice.
Yeah,
I'm not going to ever judge it, but I really believe that women need to take back the hearth and the home. They need to take back the kitchen. They need to take back their role of keeping your family well.
Yes.
And I think that it's something you can share with your husband. I do. I absolutely think in this day and age, with mortgages the way they are, it's something you have to share with your husband. But I still think it needs to happen in the nuclear home. I think it needs to happen in our kitchens. And I also think that one of the things we really need to get better at doing is saying no if that's right for you.
Yeah.
Not saying yes. And I think for me personally, and this is I think there are women out there who have wonderful, healthy boundaries and they're good at this stuff. I am terrible at this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm learning and I'm getting better.
Yeah.
And one of the biggest things that's happened now that I'm learning to have healthy boundaries is I have more rest.
Yep.
Because if somebody comes to me and asks me to do this thing for them, or tells me that something's falling apart, it's my nature as a healer to want to help them and to fix it for them. And now I'm quite empowered to say, what are you going to do about it? Not let me fix that for you.
Yeah.
What are you going to do about it? Can I offer you advice? And to just kind of stand there in my place with my life going on, and to be able to love people and offer them advice and help them in a way that doesn't hurt me. Yeah.
Without taking responsibility for it.
I can't take responsibility for it, but I used to think I could because I was a control freak, And perfectionism, we kind of nurture perfectionism a little bit like it's just part of our identity. I really don't think it is. I think perfectionism is dysfunctional. I really, really do.
Yeah.
Because if your aim is to be perfect, then your aim cannot be to be you.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cannot be you and be perfect.
It also, all these decisions that we're making are role modeling for our children. So it's passing that on. So it's setting impossible standards because none of us are perfect. We don't look like the Instagram lifestyle with the, I can turn my camera around and show you my kitchen that's just there and is still filthy from the breakfast.
I would never do that.
Oh no, shock horror. But it is we're all just doing the best that we can with what we have right now, and supporting each other as mums and as women to be real, make mistakes,
to be real, and to not try and control things. I think there is a real need for us to go, when I'm trying to control things, I'm not looking after myself. And you might think that you are because you're trying to control things so that they don't harm you, but you're trying to control things that you can't control, and you're putting way too much expectation on yourself.
Yeah.
There's so much value in just seeking excellence every day and influencing, not controlling. This is the big one.
Yeah.
And if the minute you change your perspective to, I'm going to try and influence my child's health, not I'm going to try and control it.
Yeah.
Because saying I'm going to control it means it's your fault in the first place. It's not your fault.
Yeah.
That took me so many years to say out loud, it's not my fault that my child is sick. And I can't control it. And so I had to learn how to influence everyone's health, including my own. I have to learn how to influence my environment so that I'm stable and still and full of rest. And not just,
yes.
That's
the perfect note to end on. We don't want to be all of us. No more crazy.
It is a little crazy still, but
Yeah, we are.
I'm trying to influence that too.
Yeah, this has been an awesome interview. I know that you have a little gift for our audience. Have you got just a second to tell everyone what that is?
Yes. I wrote a few really useful ebooks, and one of the ones that is my personal favorite is called Step 1, Introducing the Healing Foods.
Yeah.
And this really goes out to those mamas who are depressed or anxious or overwhelmed or stressed out to the max, who think, yes, I can't possibly, which is exactly where I was when I first read the GAPS book. I read and I went, it's too much. This book kind of helps you to just start introducing things that are going to help you feel better, one thing at a time without overwhelming you. And it's an ebook on my website, and I'm more than happy to offer it to the listeners today for free. You just have to go through the process of buying it, and then at the checkout, enter the coupon code Edwina.
I'm famous. Yeah. Love it. I'll put a little link under the video so it's easy. They can just click on that and it'll take them where they need.
That's a good place to start. It really is. Yeah.
That's perfect. This interview has been an absolute inspiration. You are an extraordinary mother, hands down, amazing. Thank you so much for your time.
It's an absolute pleasure.
All right. Bye for now.